Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today is Tuesday, October the 6th. We are now 4 weeks away and counting from these widely anticipated elections in November. We just came out with our 1 month out presidential election prediction video. This is sort of going to be a 4 week out and 1 month Senate election prediction video, kind of all in one. There's a lot that we've seen a lot of developments since our last Senate election prediction video. So we're going to get right into it again. You see the party breakdowns here: 35 Democratic seats currently held, 30 Republican seats currently held, with 35 outstanding seats. And boy, is this going to be competitive. So let's get right into it. In the state of Alaska, this has been sort of an under the radar kind of state, potentially pretty competitive state altogether. The reality of the situation is it's very hard to figure out exactly where this race stands. Al Gross, who's of course sort of the independent Democrat in this race, of course, as we know, independents typically have far more success in the state of Alaska than people really of either party, although obviously the Republican Party is able to usually sweep the elections in this state. Remember, this was a state that flipped its governorship from red to blue. In 2018 was the only state to do that, whereas 7 other states flipped their governorships. I'm sorry. It was the only state that flipped from blue to red, whereas 7 other states flipped from red to blue. Right now, though, Dan Sullivan does appear to have the firm edge. There have only been 2 polls, can you believe that, in this entire election season, basically, between Al Gross and Dan Sullivan. One of them had Dan Sullivan up by 5 points, and the other one, albeit the higher-ranked pollster, had the 2 of them tied. So as of now, I'm going to label this lean Republican. Now, assuming Dan Sullivan is able to win, I do think the margin might be a little bit bigger than this. But again, this is a difficult state to poll. It's under the radar. The Lincoln Project has been investing in this state, as has the Biden campaign. So that could definitely boost Al Gross, but we just don't really know. There's not really enough data. And the fact that there isn't really enough data, while it sort of is a nice dark horse option for the Democrats, Dan Sullivan is kind of, there's not really much to suggest that he is in any real danger here. So we're going to label that lean Republican. Jeff Merkley is going to be fine, as we know. In the state of Oregon, he's under no real pressure. This state has shifted farther and farther to the left over the years. In the state of Idaho, we've talked at length before on this channel about how Paula Jordan is sort of a name to watch in Democratic politics in going forward. She, of course, ran for this House seat 2 years ago. Came up short, but ran for it, and put together a pretty decent race. She's giving it another shot now against Jim Risch out here in Idaho. And so far, that hasn't really, there's not really any reason to believe that Jim Risch is going to face any real problems in this state. This is also going to be a safe GOP state. Now let's bounce over here to Montana. There's so many layers to this state in this election. You have the presidential races we know, and we know Donald Trump is going to win it. However, there is a House race here that's very competitive, a gubernatorial race here that's very competitive, and a Senate race here that's very competitive. Let's start with the House race. Kathleen Williams is running against Matt Rosendale. Now, Matt Rosendale, that name should ring a bell because he was the one who ran against John Tester 2 years ago for the Senate and came up short. Kathleen Williams also ran for the House 2 years ago, so you have some familiar faces here in Montana. So far, Kathleen Williams is winning. Okay, Kathleen Williams has the upper hand to this point. It's early, in terms of polling. Even though it's very late in the election season, we just don't have that much polling on that race. However, the fact that Kathleen Williams is leading in that race would suggest that the Democrats are also in a pretty good position to win the gubernatorial race. Now, why is that? Well, for one thing, all the races here are statewide because there's only one House race, number one. But number two, the current House member is Greg Gianforte. He is relinquishing his seat to run for governor. Okay, so if voters in Montana are going to vote for the opposite party of Greg Gianforte for the very seat he represents, it would suggest to you then that they would therefore reject Greg Gianforte as he, is in his gubernatorial bid, as he is challenging Mike Cooney, the current lieutenant governor of Montana. He and Steve Bullock, who of course is running for Senate, we'll get to that in a minute, have comprised a very popular administration in Montana. And we know how for years, really since the 70s and for a long, long time, decades, the Democratic Party has had a lot of success in this state. far more than other states in this area, far more than Idaho, far more than Utah, far more than Wyoming and the Dakotas, even though they've had some success there as well. But in Montana, it is very, very much a state that the Democrats can get statewide people elected in. So that is all to say that I think Steve Bullock is someone who has been in a tough fundraising battle with Steve Daines. Now, that's a little bit of a disappointment for the Democrats, that the mere statement of fact there, because he is such a popular figure in Montana and in a Democratic wave year against sort of a relatively unknown GOP incumbent senator. The Democratic Party, I think, would have been expecting Steve Bullock to just wipe the floor with Steve Daines financially. He's done very, very well. He just hasn't crushed it. Certainly not to the level that Cal Cunningham has and Jamie Harrison has as well. So that's been a little bit of a disappointment. Right when Steve Bullock, pretty much announced his candidacy, some early polling was done that had Bullock leading, had him one poll up by 7 points, another poll by 4 points. But since then, Steve Daines has retaken the upper hand. We had him one poll by 6 points. The most recent poll, I believe, had him up by 2 points. This is going to be a very, very, very close race. I think Steve Bullock has a real shot of winning this race. And I think Steve Daines is definitely among the couple or three most vulnerable incumbent GOP senators in this election cycle. And I don't think it should be any surprise whatsoever if Steve Bullock pulls this out on election night. With that said, the fact that Mike Cooney, the lieutenant governor, is down, small, but is down to Greg Gianforte, to me says that there's not going to be much of a moving of the needle between now and 4 weeks. Because, Mike Cooney and Steve Bullock, as we outlined earlier, they're running against Greg Gianforte and Steve Daines, but they're basically the same ticket, and the same voters are going to be, pushing those two agendas forward. And so it's very difficult to see how Steve Bullock's campaign is going to be able to make up those 1 or 2 points that he may be behind between now and election night. Another thing to keep in mind in this state is because of all this, all that's going on in the state, the presidential race and 3 other statewide races, there was an article that was recently put out by one of the Montana papers that talked about how just tired and worn out Montana voters are by all the campaigning. There's so much advertising, there's so much fundraising, so many, people's email inboxes are getting, it's just crazy. And so I think there's some fatigue setting in. And, I don't really expect that to really benefit either party, but it might slightly suppress turnout, which will boost Steve Daines. So I think I'm going to put this tilt Republican. Wyoming, there's no discussion. Colorado, this is obviously one of the biggest and probably the best pickup opportunity for the Democrats on this map. The Republicans still have one last little bit of GOP politics in this state, that being Cory Gardner. He is kaput, as we say in the Jewish faith. He is all but done. John Hickenlooper, who was a very popular sort of moderate conservative Democratic governor, ran for president very briefly, didn't go very far. Neither did his colleague, or probably soon-to-be colleague in the Senate, Michael Bennet, who from the same state, who also ran for president. Both of them ran very briefly. They flamed out. Anyway, Hickenlooper then shifted gears and is now running for Senate. Michael Bennet will be up in 2 years. So Hickenlooper is challenging Cory Gardner, unpopular, has voted with Donald Trump 90% of the time, has been thoroughly outraised by John Hickenlooper, and of course polling consistently shows Hickenlooper ahead. There haven't been that many polls done in this state, but polling consistently shows John Hickenlooper leading Cory Gardner, and I don't really see too much of a reason to believe that Cory Gardner is ultimately going to be able to make a comeback. So John Hickenlooper, I'm going to say this is going to be a likely Democrat for now. Now, in the state of Arizona, this is obviously another big pickup opportunity. Martha McSally, this was kind of political suicide by the Republicans. Martha McSally ran in 2 years ago and was beaten by by Kyrsten Sinema, an openly bisexual woman, which was a big result for the Democrats, because you may remember, as we've talked about on this channel, this was a pretty brutal night up to that point in the Senate for the Democrats. They had lost 4 seats: Florida, Indiana, Missouri, and North Dakota. Now, they picked one up in Nevada, But a couple days went by before they were able to call this race down here in Arizona, and they did. So that was two pickups for the Democrats just to kind of even it out. And that both of those pickups really gave the Democratic Party an opportunity to flip the Senate this time around. Now, Doug Ducey, the Republican governor of Arizona, turned right around and appointed McSally to the open seat immediately thereafter. This is, of course, a special election, which is interesting to remember, as this is, potentially going to have a Supreme Court justice maybe being confirmed in a lame duck session. We don't know that for sure yet, but that's just worth mentioning. But Mark Kelly, the former astronaut, the husband of Gabrielle Giffords, is just like John Hickenlooper is to Cory Gardner, is beating Martha McSally like a drum. And Mark Kelly should very, very much be favored to win this race. And as of now, I think both he and Joe Biden are in pretty firm positions to pick up this state for the Democrats. This should be a relatively straightforward pickup for the Democrats in the Senate. Ben Ray Lujan, this is an open seat for the Democrats. That is going to be safe as well for them. Now, South Dakota, as we know, has been a state that has been very surprisingly kind to the Democrats for a safe Republican state. The South Dakota Democratic Party does a very good job here. Tim Johnson, remember, they challenged Kristi Noem to a pretty close race in that gubernatorial race. So, of course, North Dakota and South Dakota were races that were, not even immediately called in 2008 with Barack Obama. So, it's pretty clear that these states have little bits and pieces of potentially Democratic gains here. But at the end of the day, that's going to go to Mike Rounds, just as the state of Nebraska will go to Ben Sasse. Now, in the state of Kansas, I think this race is being a little bit overblown. I would say it's mildly competitive. I think the only way that the Republicans lose this is if they just have sort of another weird, bizarro night, kind of like they did 2 years ago when Chris Kobach was very surprisingly defeated by Laura Kelly. That was a pretty shocking development that night when suddenly we realized we had a Democratic governor of the state of Kansas. Now, of course, Kobach threw his hat into the ring in the GOP primary for this Senate seat, and that he was pretty convincingly beaten by Roger Marshall. So yes, there have been some competitive polls, but most of them have Marshall leading by 8, 9 to 10 points. So I do think it's possible Barbara Bulley will definitely get over 40%, and I do think could reach 45%. But right now, I'm still going to label this a likely Republican, more of the actual likelihood characterization than a margin. Oklahoma, Jim Inhofe is going to be fine. Now in Texas, listen, the DSCC and people with the Democratic Party swear that they think MJ Hager really does have a chance to win this seat. I just can't really buy into that. Okay, she only saw a really major jolt in fundraising in these last 2 months. Okay, so she really wasn't able to really go on a big offensive ad campaign against John Cornyn until pretty late. And that's the advantage that Jamie Harrison has had and Cal Cunningham has had and Steve Bullock has had, is they have had the financial resources to really be doing that kind of thing consistently over the last 6 to 8 months. Whereas MJ Hager, of course, her primary was pretty late, just hasn't really been able to do that. She now has a sizable war chest, but there's only 4 weeks left. And, of course, polling shows her behind John Cornyn by 6, 7, 8 points. Now, I do think MJ Hager will crack 45% because, as we know, Texas is a rapidly changing state. It is not a safe GOP state anymore, really, on any level. There is a small chance that the Democrats could flip the state house as well. And then in 2 years, it is very possible that they could get a governorship elected here too. Texas is on the verge, people. It really is. But not this time around. I'm going to say lean Republican. Now, Tina Smith is obviously not nearly as well known or popular as Amy Klobuchar is. However, the Republicans have sort of lost their opportunity in this state. Remember, Donald Trump lost this state by less than 2 points. And, of course, Hillary Clinton only won this state with a plurality. So naturally, I think it was very smart of the Trump campaign to prioritize this as a potential pickup opportunity on both the senatorial and presidential level. But in 2018, the Democrats swept the elections here. There were 3 statewide races. The Democrats took all of them convincingly. Tim Walz, the governor, elected. Tina Smith was in that special election, elected. Amy Klobuchar also reelected. That combined with steady polling leads for Joe Biden and now for Tina Smith, I think pretty much rests this. I'm going to label it safe, probably more of a likelihood characterization than an actual margin, because the name of the Republican candidate is escaping me right now. But I do expect that candidate to reach 45%. Okay, Iowa, such a fascinating state to break down. Very similar kind of to Montana, a lot of different layers here. So, of course, this was a state that, within the last 12 years has voted for a Democratic presidential candidate 2 out of the last 3 elections. Okay, it voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012. Shifted very far to the right in 2016 on the presidential level. Since then, in 2018, it elected the state of Iowa, also re-elected a Republican governor, albeit in a closer race. Okay, Kim Reynolds, a Republican governor, defeated Fred Hubbell, the Democrat. It was about 53-47, so, relatively close. And then, of course, since then, as we know, Bruce Braley long gone, so it's Charles Grassley and Joni Ernst. The Democrats, meanwhile, of the 4 House seats that comprise the Iowa House delegation, the Democrats control 3 of those seats, the 4th of which is this seat up here in northwest Iowa that, of course, was for years represented by Steve King. Okay, so it pretty much shows you, where this state currently lies. It's kind of a split decision, although it kind of leans Republican. However, Theresa Greenfield has been outraising Joni Ernst. Joni Ernst is not very popular in her state. This was not a race that really got much attention, didn't really garner nearly as much as the one in North Carolina, as the one in Maine, as the one in Arizona, Colorado, but it absolutely should have been because Theresa Greenfield was pretty much in control of this race from the beginning. Now, Joni Ernst recovered some and led several of those polls, but now she is again down to Theresa Greenfield. One highly ranked pollster had her up by 12 points just the other day. So now I'm going to continue to label this tilt Democrat. Arkansas, there's not even a Democratic candidate. And then, of course, in Louisiana, the Democratic candidate was only very, very recently even announced. Now, in Mississippi, Mike Espy's giving it one more shot against Cindy Hyde-Smith. There's really no reason to believe that Cindy Hyde-Smith is going to lose this race because even whenever it was less than 2 years ago because I'm pretty sure it was after that. It was the runoff race. And, Cindy Hyde-Smith had some controversy surrounding her because of some rather racially charged comments she had made. Anyway, point being, there's not really a reason to believe that Mike Espy has any greater chance to win this time. It's admirable that he's trying again, but whatever. Cindy Hyde-Smith, this is a likelihood characterization. I'm labeling that safe. Now, Doug Jones in Alabama, there was some hope for the Democratic Party that he could maybe just barely survive out here, but let's be honest, it's way too ruby red a state. Tommy Tuberville, while not exactly, a robust candidate himself, he is not Roy Moore, okay? So, and polling has had Tommy Tuberville ahead of Jones by double digits consistently. Now, in Georgia, this is pretty interesting here. Okay, we have 2 pretty competitive races going on here. As we remember, only 2 years ago, Stacey Abrams got 48% in an election that was pretty much marred by controversy. And so since then, the Democrats, as they have been in this state for a long time, have been pretty bullish about their chances to potentially come away with the state of Georgia. Of course, as I said, there are 2 different races here, and as you can see here, there's one general election and one special election. Now, let's start with the general. Jon Ossoff, who, of course, real early on, I believe the first year of Trump's term, he was at the center of the most expensive House race in United States history. He lost that race. Now, it wasn't a conservative district, but he lost the race. Okay, and it was close, but he lost the race. Since then, the fundraising has been very, very good for him, and his campaign did release some very interesting numbers not that long ago. They said that since the 2018 gubernatorial election, Georgia Democrats have registered 750,000 more voters. That's a lot. Okay, that is a lot of new voters. Now, look, again, I've said it before, it's important to point out, it's not a political statement, but it's very important to point out that this is a state that has engaged in some active voter suppression and has admitted to doing so. Okay, so who knows if all 750,000 of those people are actually going to be able to vote or even turn up to vote, or who knows. But Jon Ossoff has also been very quietly, like right there, kind of neck and neck with David Perdue, whose lead is within the margin of error. So this is a close race here. I'm still going to give Perdue the benefit of the doubt. But remember, Democratic wave year, high enthusiasm, high turnout. Also in this state, you have a very unpopular governor in Brian Kemp. So just keep an eye on that. And then, of course, here in this special election, this has changed, folks. It really has. Um, we labeled this safe for a long time because this is the jungle system race here, and it looked like the runoff that is going to be held in January was just going to be between Doug Collins and Kelly Loeffler. However, right now, it looks like it's suddenly going to be Raphael Warnock and Doug Collins. Okay, Raphael Warnock surged into the lead, not just into second place behind Doug Collins, by the way, into first place, okay, altogether. Now, the problem for him is that the votes being split between Kelly Loeffler and Doug Collins is more than what Warnock could potentially get from Matt Lieberman. But at the same time, Raphael Warnock has shown that he actually really belongs in this race and might indeed have a chance, especially if the second place finisher is Kelly Loeffler, which we don't expect. But I'm not labeling this safe anymore. In fact, I'm only going to label this lean. Now in South Carolina, another suddenly very competitive race. You get the sense of where these races are tilting right now, where this overall map has gone. Lindsey Graham, at first, it sort of looked like another Beto O'Rourke, Ted Cruz scenario where you have a very, very big establishment Republican incumbent against sort of an upstart, young, new, relatively moderate, popular, high fundraising guy, good candidate. But ultimately, he'll survive. Well, that's not really the case anymore, okay? That's kind of what Beto O'Rourke did against Ted Cruz, whereas Jamie Harrison can actually win this race, okay? He has, I don't know that there are adequate words in the English language to describe just how bad Jamie Harrison has absolutely demolished Lindsey Graham financially, to the point where Lindsey Graham had to go on national television and basically beg for money. Harrison has more money than he can spend. Literally, there is no way he can even spend the amount of money he still has left in the coffers with 28 days to go. And we did say, about 8 weeks ago, we did say that Jamie Harrison was starting this gigantic advertising blitz against Lindsey Graham, and it was absolutely worth paying attention to what potential effects that could have on the polls. So I'm trying to conserve battery power here. What potential effect that could have on the polls as he ratchets that up further and further and further. Well, here we are, and it has done that. Okay, Jamie Harrison has been tied with Lindsey Graham, down by 1 point against Lindsey Graham in the last 5 to 6 polls. It's a race, folks. It's a race, and the very high-ranked pollsters have this as a real race. I'm not going to be able to characterize it just yet, even as a tilt, but it's only lean this time. Okay, so that's the change in characterization. We've gone from likely to lean. Lindsey Graham has a real race on his hands. Tennessee, Bill Hagerty is going to be just fine. That's the name I couldn't remember last time for you frequent viewers. All right, so North Carolina, there's so much new stuff to break down here. Bad news for the Democrats, okay? Cal Cunningham, who was really, really doing well in this state, was leading Thom Tillis. Thom Tillis, by the way, tested positive for coronavirus, further complicating, his ability to surge forward a little bit in the campaign. But so really all signs kind of pointed toward a Cal Cunningham victory as he raised another staggering fundraising total in the third quarter, $28.3 million. However, it has come out that Cal Cunningham has been engaged in extramarital affairs, and apparently, according to the DSCC, more information about another woman, of course, whom he is not married to, is set to come to the surface in the coming days. Cunningham has since canceled some in-person events. He has obviously not dropped out of the race and says he will not. Now, 2 polls have come out since that first story about him, and both of them have one of them has Cal Cunningham up by 6 points and the other by 5. So I think the Cunningham campaign was bracing for the absolute worst. But so far, they're keeping their head above water. Okay, a 6-point lead after something like that, is a pretty good sign. And of course, I think that Cal Cunningham is potentially getting a boost from Roy Cooper, who's a very popular incumbent Democratic governor of this state who's also up for re-election. Now, it's really hard to see voters paying this close attention to it. Let's just be honest. People don't care enough about politics to split their vote between, I'm going to vote for a Democratic governor and a Republican senator. Now, we've seen that many times over in Montana, but who knows if that's really going to happen here in North Carolina. Okay, So I cannot label this lean anymore because of that story, and especially because we know more is supposed to come out. So I'm going to downgrade this to a tilt for Cal Cunningham, but at the moment, because the polling still backs it up, that's still a pickup for the Democrats. Now in Illinois, Dick Durbin is in no real position to be worried here. He's going to be just fine, as will Mitch McConnell in Kentucky. Real early on in the campaign season, it appeared that Amy McGrath, because of her gigantic fundraising totals, may have had a chance, but no, not going to happen. West Virginia, nothing to talk about. Virginia, there is a serious GOP candidate, Daniel Gade, who's challenging Mark Warner. The Republicans, to their credit, they're not giving this state up. Even though it's become a pretty safe Democratic state now, they control the state legislature. They have both senators, the governorship. It's regularly theirs on the presidency level. But, the Republicans can still field real candidates. And Mark Warner, as popular as he is, Daniel Gade might, if he does particularly well, will get around 43, 44, maybe 45% if he has a good day. Now, in the state of Michigan, this is a little bit of a tilt one here. John James is, he's a real candidate here against Gary Peters. Of course, he tried to unseat Debbie Stabenow 2 years ago unsuccessfully. Debbie Stabenow was able to survive. John James got around 45% of the vote. And he's trying again. Okay, he's going against Gary Peters. This time, John James suffered a little bit of a setback when he was robbed of his opportunity to speak at the RNC because obviously it went virtual. And since then, the Trump campaign has since yanked all their ads out of here. So any sort of GOP boost, national GOP boost, has been dashed as well. Polling has been relatively consistent in the last 3-4 weeks, but it's been closer than it was 2 months ago for Gary Peters. So I'm still going to label this likely more as a likelihood characterization than a margin characterization. The VP nod still, I don't know why that's still not working, but it's going to go to Kamala Harris in this particular model. Now in Delaware, of course, Chris Coons is going to be fine. Cory Booker is going to be fine. Jack Reed is going to be fine. And of course, Ed Markey is going to be fine. Now, in New Hampshire, this was a state that the Republican Party felt they might actually have a chance to win in, but they failed to field a real serious candidate. Okay, Kelly Ayotte is just not going to cut it. The Republicans can win in this state. They really can. But in order for them to win out here, they have to have a real serious candidate with some real note and pop to them. That's not who Kelly Ayotte is, and Jeanne Shaheen is going to be just fine here. It is a state to watch in 2 years when Maggie Hassan is up and could potentially be challenged by Chris Sununu, a very popular incumbent GOP governor. All right, now in Maine, you can see how this is sort of a tilt here. Even though with the Democrats having the VP nod here, they're at 50, with, of course, the majority in the tiebreak vote here. But in Maine, Susan Collins is in the fight of her life politically against Sarah Gideon. Sarah Gideon, of course, has outraised her thoroughly. This was a seat the Democrats were pointing to for a long time, ever since Susan Collins' vote to confirm Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Remember, she's a senator that's even been endorsed by Democrats in the past. Of course, Joe Lieberman even recently endorsed her. And she's hanging in there, okay? She is hanging in there. Sarah Gideon has not really been able to pull away really in this state, 3-4 points. The most recent poll had her by 1 point. It's close here, but I do think Sarah Gideon has the upper hand. I'm only going to be able to label it tilt, though, because it's very close. So there you go. That's 5 pickups for the Democrats, 1 in Arizona, 1 in Colorado, 1 in Iowa, 1 in North Carolina, and 1 in Maine. So let's go through all the winners here for you. We have Dan Sullivan winning in Alaska, Jeff Merkley winning in Oregon, Jim Risch in Idaho, Steve Daines in Montana. I believe this is John Barrasso's seat, I'm pretty sure, here in Wyoming. John Hickenlooper in Colorado. Mark Kelly in Arizona. Ben Ray Lujan in New Mexico. Mike Rounds in South Dakota. Ben Sass in Nebraska. Roger Marshall in Kansas. Jim Inhofe in Oklahoma. And Jay Hager. John Cornyn in Texas. Up here in Minnesota, we have Tina Smith winning. Teresa Greenfield with a pickup defeating Joni Ernst. Tom Cotton easily winning re-election here in Arkansas, as well as in Louisiana. Bill Cassidy, who of course also recently tested positive for coronavirus, he will win. Cindy Hyde-Smith wins re-election in Mississippi. Tommy Tuberville wins re-election in Alabama. And then we have David Perdue holding on barely against Jon Ossoff, and Doug Collins likely coming out on top in that jungle primary system. Bill Hagerty wins in Tennessee. Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. Cal Cunningham with the pickup despite all of his problems in North Carolina. Mitch McConnell hangs on in Kentucky. Dick Durbin in Illinois. Shelley Moore Capito in West Virginia. And Mark Warner in Virginia. And then we have Gary Peters surviving against John James. And then out here on the East Coast, we have Chris Coons, Cory Booker, Jack Reed, and Ed Markey surviving up here in the New England area. And then, of course, Sarah Gideon unseating longtime GOP incumbent Susan Collins to put the number at 51 for the Democrats and 49 for the Republicans. So thank you guys so much again for watching this video. Again, this is our 4-month Senate election prediction video. Please comment down in the suggestions below. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you have not already. Remember, I will be sure to answer any questions you may pose in the chat. I'm very good about that. I'll pay attention to them. I always read your comments. I'm always excited to see what you guys have to say. We'll be coming back soon with our quarter of 100 days away presidential election video, so stay tuned for that. So thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you in November.